Hi there, and thanks for listening. If you're enjoying our podcast guests and have a recommendation of someone you think we should have on here, by all means, let us know. Whether it's a teacher, meditator, author, or scholar, we welcome any suggestion of a potential guest whose voice and journey can be shared to the world. To offer up a name, go to our website, insightmyanmar.org. That's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR.org, and let us know who it is. But for now, sit back and enjoy the podcast that follows.
When I think about stories I could share from Myanmar or my experience, there's one that just immediately rises to mind. And Joe, I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, essentially, I have to say before I tell it that when it happened, I actually had hesitated to tell anyone because it's the type of story that could be taken wrong. It could be... I didn't want to reflect badly on the other people involved, and it could easily, and I didn't want it to be sensationalized and negative. And
right.
And it's the type of story that it would be easy to make myself totally a victim and not have any compassion for the other side of the story. So, but let me just get right into it. Like essentially, I was surrounded by 40 men with weapons that were there to kill me. It was basically a tribe in Myanmar. And, it's interesting because we hear about tribes, and then a lot of it's from like movies and television and novels and stuff like that. And some tribes you visit when you travel that I visited they kind of are like that. They're kind of what we expect, it's, what's the word, it's kind of unreasonable expectations that their dress would be exotic and their ways would be very primitive or something. And sometimes we get to villages and tribes and we look around, and I've been disappointed before because they weren't like that. I wanted I wanted as a traveler an exotic experience, and sometimes it just looks like a normal village. They do have a tribal identity, and this area I was in was like that. It seemed until that happened, and then you see smoke signals and hear drums, and I'll never hear drums the same again. Those kind of tribal drums, because they were actually, unbeknownst to my companion and my partner at the time that I was wandering around with. I should say, I was a monk at the time, and so there were two of us as monks.
Right, you were a forest monk, right?
A forest monk, right? We were on what in Thai they call Dhutaṅga, but they don't really have a word for that I know of in Burmese. But basically, wandering around and staying sometimes in monasteries, but often in just in the forest or in caves. Or we were in a tribal area, and basically what we were doing was. I had been to that area years before, and I had seen this valley that had a big stream going through it, and it's kind of a rarity, So as a forest monk, I was always looking for places that had, a cave is nice or some other, but the important thing is that it has water, because you need to bathe and you need to clean. Don't really need to cook, but in certain times you might need to boil water or something. But basically, having water nearby is an essential. So one way or another, either you can get it from the village, or even better is if it's so. Anyways, always wanted as a monk to explore that area and see if there are any caves also. And I'd come across someone who told me that there are caves somewhere along that. If you go through that, it's a really dramatic entrance to the valley. It's like there's kind of this steep cliffs, and it just cuts, that valley, and it probably flows. I don't know where it goes on the other side, but I was interested in finding that out too. But anyways, it was almost like a gorge, So I knew there were villages nearby. So what a great place to perhaps find a nice spot for a monk. So my forest monk companion and I went exploring this area. Unbeknownst to us, it's a tribal area that's highly protected. That tribe has an army, and that's what we encountered. So essentially, these people, they're Buddhists, but they didn't believe we were monks. They thought we were spies. And this all unfolded slowly over time. We didn't really know what was going on, or what, like the first time we saw them, they were up on the cliffs above us throwing big rocks in the water, and they had certain colors on that were similar to what school children in Myanmar wear. And so we thought they were just naughty teenagers, just kind of causing a ruckus. And then we decided to head back. We didn't want to go further down the valley. We had gone a ways into this gorge, and then encountered that, and then we decided to head back on our own. But this group actually caught up to us. Amazingly how fast they covered that terrain. First of all, that was already, you could tell they were well versed at getting around their own territory, kind of wild terrain. But it was a group of men, and as it turned out, it was a group of tribal men actually sent out to intercept us. And so we were talking with them. Yeah, they were. I couldn't quite pick up what their tone was. There were a couple guys that were kind of a little rough. None of them spoke English. Obviously, there's only one kid a teenager or young man who spoke Burmese, and so.
And your companion was a Burmese monk who spoke.
That's right.
Obviously, fluent Burmese and some English. Was that right?
Yes, exactly. That's right. Just a little English, not much. We didn't really talk in English. I knew just enough Burmese, and he knew just enough English that when I couldn't fill something out with my Burmese, he could zero in on a few words.
How far back did you guys go? Like how long have you been planning the trip, or what were the dynamics of, when you talk about like a traveling companion in wild lands, the first thing I think you think of is like, okay, well, give me the character of these two guys and their relationship and where they came from, how they planned it, what's the context of you two kind of solo travelers in a foreign wild land.
Right. Yeah, I'll get to that. There's a couple other aspects I want to cover first. So this young man we were talking to, he did all the translating for us, and it seemed to go reasonably well, but it was kind of clear they didn't want us there, and that they were there to kind of check us out. So it seemed all right, but as we were walking away from that, they were kind of, actually one of them was like shouting at us to go, and then then I had a feeling that particular valley was not. We were not welcome there. That was clear. So we walked out, and I thought everything was fine. Yeah. So you were asking me about my travel companion. That's like I said, an interesting story in and of itself. I'd set off actually alone. I lived in a bamboo hut in this remote monastery in the mountains. It's a great little monastery. It's not really in a town, and it's hard to get to. Meaning there is a road, but it's in the rainy season you can hardly use the road at all, and even at the best of times, it's not a road that cars can travel. So we don't get any visitors in cars, and it's probably a good 2 miles from the nearest kind of normal sized town. There's a small village about a mile away, but about I had to go 2.5 miles on my alms round each way every morning along the train tracks. So it's not far from the train tracks down the valley. And so it's nice and remote. We don't get any car sounds. We don't get any visitors of people coming in cars. Occasionally on a motorcycle, but basically motorcycle and foot's the only way to get there. So that's where I was based. And, I'd gone on little excursions around that valley, the one that the train runs down. By the way, my walks for Pindapata every morning were incredible. Kind
That's
of misty.
alms round, yeah.
Yeah, my alms rounds, the misty jungle walking along the train tracks, with
I've seen some of those pictures. They turned out quite well. They definitely give a feel for it. And so like it sounds like what you're saying, to set the context, is you were already living pretty remote already. I mean, knowing your story, knowing this story, and also knowing your background, you were in Yangon for some time. You were getting the most of the monk's life there, just support and guidance and training. And you had found this monastery north of Yangon, and you were already pretty remote in a pretty beautiful natural place, living with not that many other people. And this is all prior to your walk deeper into the wild.
Right, that's right. I had my proclivity just as when I was a lay person, I was an outdoor guide. I just loved nature. So, and then that part of the suttas, reading about the Buddha, sleeping in the forest and all that sounded so appealing to me. So I always wanted to be, if I was going to be a monk, I definitely wanted to incorporate being in the forest and being in nature. It seemed to have a precedent in history in Buddhism. So, so I would seek out. If I heard anyone that heard of forest monks, I would try to, seek out knowledge about that. But I was pretty comfortable. I mean, I don't know nearly as much about jungles as I know about mountains and deserts. Not that I'm an expert at anything of those, but I'm pretty comfortable in mountains and pretty comfortable in the desert. But jungle mountains, there's a lot of different stuff that there's where I live now. There's elephants
in Thailand,
that's new, but there's tigers and very venomous snakes and giant centipedes and all kinds of critters.
So were there things you did to, you kind of got more and more remote? You were in Yangon in a city center for a while, and then you went to this remote place, further remote place where there was less services and amenities and even support, and then you went deeper still into this walk that we're going to get back to. But did you do anything in the way of training? Like, did you read books? Did you look on internet? Did you talk to people? Did you kind of have experiments, or how did you what did you do to get yourself ready for what you say was a new natural environment that you weren't accustomed to from your previous experience, jungle?
That's a good question. I mean, there's one obvious answer, but I'm trying to think of other stuff. I had met forest monks, and I tried to glean as much as I can from that. And what I've read as well, I try to get a feel. And also just the beauty of incorporating the practice while you're doing it. I mean, that goes immediately, becomes actually obvious how important practice is to do that well. And maybe that sense will get fleshed out later in this through the story itself. But the obvious thing I did is I actually had spent 2 months in Wat Pah Nanachat, which is in Thailand, in eastern Thailand, and that's that's in the Thai forest tradition, and it's a specific monastery that Luang Por Cha had made for foreigners, with foreign.
Right, Ajahn Chah.
Yeah, they call him Luang Por here, which means like grandfather. So Ajahn just means teacher, just for information for people.
Right, right.
We say Ajahn Chah a lot, and that's kind of what people know him as. But Luang Por means grandfather. So any monk here that's reached that kind of status, so to speak, of import and age, would be called Luang Por. And I might not be saying that exactly right, but anyways, he had set this up for foreign monks in this forest tradition, and there's this particular monk, Thai monk there, doesn't speak any English, but he knows herbs. He knows like all the like traditional crafts, like making toothsticks, out of a particular tree to brush your teeth. How to make those brooms that you see all over Asia, not the soft ones for inside the house, but the bigger ones.
Right.
For sweeping outside, and cleaning up leaves and all that. How to make bowl stands, how to hand stitch robes. And so, by the way, every robe there that people wear comes from donated white cotton cloth. And you mark it, cut it yourself. They do have sewing machines, but you're not allowed to use them until you've made an entire set of robes by hand stitching.
This is like a one-stop shop for forest monk training, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent 2 months there at the time where, so what happens in this, it's, when you get into it and start doing these things, you actually start to understand the cycle of seasons in the Buddhist world, in the scriptures, why certain things come at certain times. So I was there just after the rains. And if you think about it, you're kind of hunkered down during the rains for 3 months. And then as that ends, there's, the katina ceremony and all that, which is about robe, making a robe. But essentially, this is a time where you prepare to go out again, out of your monastery. Right. And in the Buddhist time, that meant walking around, and there weren't monasteries for a while. But a lot of people would, take off and go to other monasteries, or they would, or to seek out other teachers or influence, or whatever their path called for, or just go out into the forest again.
Right, and we should mention for people listening to the West who haven't had time in Asia, for people in the West who are used to basically 4 seasons in Asia, where Southeast Asia, we're talking about 3. You're talking about the rains, the hot season, and what they call the cold season, but is actually just kind of like the sometimes temperate, not extremely hot.
The less hot season.
So less hot, right. And just as in the West, growing up in the West, we have these strong associations from sports to holidays to political events to family, just as we have real strong connotations to what these 4 seasons mean and what happens around these events in terms of, cultural and other things on the calendar. Just to flesh that out a little bit more, in Southeast Asia, these 3 seasons have very strong connotations in other ways, and especially in Buddhist countries where the 3 seasons were basically as they were for the Buddha 2,500 years ago. You're making a case for being a Buddhist monk, living in the tradition of how the Buddha taught, and feeling kind of the purpose and the activity and the movement of these seasons, in possibly reflecting on what they meant for the Buddha himself when he started to give his own sense of teachings. And that's also interesting because it fits into that category of things that you kind of have to come to that part of the world where he actually lived to get certain pieces of wisdom that are harder when they get exported much further. So anyway, just some context to provide as you go on telling what you were learning from, hunkering down in rains to then leaving for other seasons.
Well, what you say is true, that's in one sense that there are these 3 seasons that are predominant in this culture, and that's the same as it was before. It's right after the rains, there's a kind of a mini hot season. They don't call it season actually, but it gets hot again, but then it goes right into cool season. So it's basically rainy season, cool season, hot season. So right after the rains, they're doing this preparation. But the point I was trying to make is even more than that. It's not just they follow the same seasons, is that they're forest monks still. So what's going on in modern Buddhism is most monks are not forest monks. So the cycles of activity are different. It's not really, katina the katina ceremony doesn't mean as much anymore. Because this isn't the time monks are preparing to go out, because nobody goes out anymore after rains. Yeah, they can travel more, but it's not the same as it was back then. But because this group was actually still forest monks, and they did go out after, and often just going off on a walk, wherever, or finding a place in the forest and just staying there in the mountains or wherever. Because they're still doing that, then a lot of what the Buddha was doing makes much more sense. And so this preparation time is what I was getting at, that isn't really needed by most modern monks. Is still active there. It's not just remembered, it's actually active. So everyone that needs robes is making robes.
This is at Wat Pah Nanachat.
At Wat Pah Nanachat, right? So,
right, and just to put a bookmark in what you said, for the listener, we're going to come back later because as you were describing that change from monks in the Buddhist day and monks in the modern age, that actually has a direct relation to some of the difficulties you had later in your story of how the monastic order changed and what you were doing not fitting into the conception of a modern monk. So let's continue on the Wat Pah Nanachat and put a bookmark in there to return to.
Yeah, that's right. That does totally play into some of the factors that actually got me in trouble later. So anyways, there is this, I was talking about this Thai monk. He shows up every year right after the rains. And there's interesting stories I could tell about him too. He was actually an abbot and ran away from his monastery because he didn't want to be an abbot. He wanted to be a forest monk, but he has all of these skills. Like I said, I haven't even mentioned all the things that he teaches weaving to make knitted the alms bowl baskets. Sorry, the cover for it. I didn't mean basket. The cover for that. And the same skill to make belts. So he teaches that kind of weaving. He teaches stitching. He teaches dyeing. Teaches broom-making. I mean, and then who knows what else he knows. But he actually went back into the suttas and the Vinaya, the texts, and looking for any clues of how they did these things, and then recreated. I mean, he's an amazing person, but he didn't want to be an abbot, so he ran away. And one of the abbots at Wat Pah Nanachat found him and invited him, and what he found is like overall, the foreign monks were the most interested group. There are Thai monks that are interested in these crafts as well. But the foreign monks really wanted to learn, like myself. So that's why he always comes to Wat Pah Nanachat to teach around this time, to share what he knows. So I went in there and soaked up all of this. And I went away from Wat Pah Nanachat with a set of white cotton robe cloth. Not all three. I got the lower robe and the inner upper robe finished. And then, so I learned how to stitch, but I wanted to use Myanmar dye for the color. So I wanted to find something local and try that out. So, but I learned other things too, I mean, Wat Pah Nanachat's big enough where you can actually sleep outside, and it's still natural enough where you're still in the forest. But there's walls, so there's no tigers and stuff. But there's still centipedes and scorpions and ants. I found out are really who runs the forest, who rules the jungle. So if you don't know how to work with ants, you're not going to go very well. So and there's a style, and it's different in Thailand, but maybe it's similar in Myanmar in some ways, but I didn't really tap into this. The way you learn things is really, they don't just give you a lesson and just kind of lay it all out for you. You observe. Observing's a big part of it. You just watch what they do, and then you try it yourself. And so even with chores, they don't walk you through it and hold you by the hand. You just have to kind of watch and jump in and try it, and it's a weird thing. It's a really beautiful teaching because you kind of have to trust. You don't get quite enough information to make you feel relaxed and secure. But if you can relax into that not knowing, it's like a risk. But you take this risk, and it's like you get just enough information, and there's a beautiful process that unfolds. For example, like he'll undo your stitching that you did wrong, and he'll do it again right in front of you, and then he'll undo it, and then you go back and then try your best, right? But through the process of trying your best, you realize what you're starting to do better, and you also realize what you don't know. And the next time you go watch him, because of that, you're hyper-focused on that part that you don't know. And you're watching, how does he do that? I can do this better and I understand this now, but there's still that part I don't understand. He makes it look so easy. And then next time you watch him do it, you like zero in on that point, and then you go back and try that. And it's like there's this natural process where it just unfolds step by step rather than them writing a book or giving like a series, like it's not laid out like we do often in the West. It's a different style of learning. And it's really
right.
neat.
So it sounds like a different cultural way of monastic training and monastic learning, even among the different Buddhist countries that are there, that you learned when you temporarily left Myanmar to train here at Wat Pah Nanachat in Thailand.
That's right. And so even about the ants, and no one comes out and say, hey, the ants, this is how you deal with them. You kind of live out there, and there's different kind of ants, and they have their own different characteristics, and you got to learn how to work with that and live with that. You're living in their neighborhood. And I mean, I could spend a whole episode talking about all the stuff that happened at Wat Pah Nanachat, but
yeah,
let's pull it back. Let's do it another time.
Yeah.
I'll pull it back to my story. So here I am back in my monastery in Myanmar in the mountains, and so I had some of these skills I had learned. I had these, and I just wanted to go out and try the walkabout, what they call Dhutaṅga in Thailand, and a little background on that. It's like Myanmar does have. Well, I'll take it straight into your point. Actually, Myanmar does have forest monks. But not that many. It's not quite the same as in Thailand. Thailand actually has a whole tradition, and that tradition has gained renown, and that has a different effect on they're familiar with it. Because the top forest monks of history, like Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Chah, Ajahn, I'm saying Ajahn, these are all actually Lungpo as well, grandfathers. Mahabua, there's several of them, and they have a very good reputation for being good monks. They follow the discipline. They don't handle money, as referenced in Usarna's podcast. That whole issue. It's not all the monks in Thailand. This is just this group. They're very firm in their commitment to Vinaya, for example. And so when you see monks walking on the road, there's a kind of set of accoutrements they have like this. It looks like a giant umbrella. They keep it closed when they're walking, but it has a big mosquito net. So that's what they sit and sleep under when they're in the forest. But you can kind of recognize them quite quickly because of that. When they're walking, they have that rolled up on their back or over their shoulder. Is another. You actually see statues here in Thailand with a monk walking with that over their shoulder. So whereas in Myanmar, it's not so familiar, even though there's famous monks that lived in the forest, like really in the forest without a monastery or anything. Somehow it hasn't transferred into this kind of overall respect. As a matter of fact, as I found out as things unfolded and I got myself into kind of the worst case scenario of something I'm about to say is that in Myanmar, even though they have that respect for famous forest monks, a lot of people's immediate response to seeing a monk outside of their monastery is like, where are you from? And the assumption often is like, if you don't have a monastery, you must not be a good monk. You must have been kicked out. Like, it's naughty monks get thrown. They can't disrobe you for being naughty unless you break one of the four defeats, right? Killing a human being, stealing something of value enough that would get you thrown in jail, telling a lie about your attainments, or having any kind of sexual conduct with another person, like actual sex of some sort. Short of that, if a monk's just misbehaving at any degree, you can't actually disrobe someone else. Those four things defeat you, or you can choose to not be a monk. These 5 ways end your monkhood. But there are recourses to throw people out. So Burmese people, they're not used to monks walking around. And if you say, I can tell them where I ordained and stuff, but it's weird that I'm not there, because that's just not normal. And there's the suspicion. And I speculated on this. It's like, it's from, it's intra-Myanmar and inter-Myanmar, meaning the Japanese and the British and these other forces coming into Myanmar. And they just, the people from other places are just not welcome. In history, they've done bad things. It's not been nice. And then intra-Myanmar, between like the current or the military government and a lot of the tribes, there was horrible treatment. And so there's not like this it's not true. Like every region's not the same, but there is kind of this overlying distrust of people from somewhere else. So no matter where I've been in Myanmar, in these kind of places, they'll come to check you out. And oftentimes that's amiable. If they get a reasonable feeling from you, then they're okay with that. That's actually part of the process. I learned that like the village headman and a few other people will come to meet you and ask you what you're doing. And, if you have a reasonable story and, it's good to be very polite at these times, just tell them, but it is unusual. So for example, I haven't even talked about how I met my traveling companion yet. So I'm jumping ahead a bit. But after we set off on this journey, we had gone a certain ways, and we were in kind of an agricultural area. But there's this little hill that wasn't plowed for agriculture, and it had beautiful trees and stuff. It just looked like a nice place to rest on our walk. So we thought we'd rest and drink some water there. And well, it turned out the reason they didn't cut that area is because that's where they burn people. It's actually a cremation ground. And we were practicing some Dhutaṅga practices, these 13 austere practices, and one of them is sleeping or staying in a what's called a charnel ground or these types of places, cemeteries these days. And so, there's a couple skulls on the ground, and it just kind of slowly. It wasn't just one or two. There's all these little mounds, and they're so old. Some it just didn't occur to me that. Wow, there are a lot of mounds here, and wow, this is actually quite a big and very old place where they take the remains of the body. I'm not sure what the process is. I'm not sure why those skulls were exposed, and other ones were mounds. I don't know where the body is or what's left that's in the mound itself. But essentially, the reason I'm telling this story is because that's where we were. So that's kind of a side note that we actually decided to stay the night there. Because I'd never done that before as a monk, so or not otherwise either. So we thought we'd try that. We'd sleep in the charnel grounds and just see what. It's amazing when you actually try some of these things that are in the text. You can start to see the benefits of things. Now, this is another side note, but for a lot of Asian cultures, they have a different relationship with ghosts than I do. So I've never seen a ghost, but there's a high level of fear around ghosts. Mm-hmm. So it is. If you read Ajahn Chah's story about sleeping in the cemetery, he was terrified, like in tears, like with things actually starting to happen as well. So. Mm-hmm. I slept right in between two of these mounds, and I slept like a baby. I just don't have that kind of cultural background. But anyways, so the reason I'm telling this is more connected to being checked out by the village headman. So that's where we were. So just laying some context there, not necessarily important to that part of the story, but as expected, as can be expected, I'm learning that after a few hours, people starting to notice us and notice that we're actually kind of sticking around, and so as it come dusk and stuff, that the village headman did come to visit us, and he just kind of asked what we're doing and stuff. We just told him. It just so happens that the companion I had was he's a Sayadaw. I mean, he's the abbot of a small monastery. Mm-hmm. And some of the people from that village we were not so far away. Some of the villagers were actually his disciples or his students. So that's a normal thing. So this is just learning about how to come into other cultures. If you come alone, it's a surprise to them. There's a bit of a risk there, and that's something I learned, right? So back to the main event, that's one of the conditions, was that they didn't know us, and people don't usually come into their territory like that. The other condition is it's a tribe, a minority that did not get along well with the government, and they had their own militia, and so they were very protective, And there are other operations that they were doing. They just don't really want other people to know about. So they definitely don't know I'd said before that they thought we were spies. So this goes back to some of our other podcasts, that everything arises due to causes and conditions. That was the interesting thing. So there I am, like, it's getting dark and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and the two of us are surrounded by 40 men, and they all have a weapon. They weren't rich, so there weren't many guns. There was only maybe, I saw two, there might have been like 3 guns. There were at least 2. I was pretty sure they weren't going to waste any bullets on me, though. It's expensive for them. There were a few machetes, which is a common tool used in daily life there for making things from bamboo, or just when you walk to clear things out of the way. But most of them had either a sharpened stick or a big piece of bamboo, like the size of a baseball bat, and to kind of use like that. So these 40 guys, roughly 40 guys, all had some kind of weapon, and they were all there to, I realized they were there to kill me. Those weapons were meant for the 2 of us because they thought we were intruders. So another condition is, in the history of Myanmar, there have been spies that dressed as monks. Even in Thailand, actually, this is an interesting thing, and this is related to Myanmar as well. The reason they shave eyebrows in the monks is because of spies. That Burmese people were coming to Thailand as spies and dressed as monks. So what they did, that what Thai people did as a response, it has nothing to do with Buddhism history. It's totally to do with geopolitics and war. It must have been the king actually ordered all the monks to shave their eyebrows. That way, the spies Thai spies in Myanmar, when these spies that were monks in Thailand returned to Myanmar, they would be identifiable by their shaved eyebrows. Right. And so, so that's one piece to this puzzle of why these people, why these Buddhists were about to kill 2 monks. It's because they didn't think we were monks. They thought we were spies. And there's a precedent for that in history. And there's a current reason, because they're in conflict at the time, So the interesting thing is, it'd be so easy to victimize, but it's also a good reflection of how the mind's doing, in meditation in general and at the specific moment. But part of it's due to the speed things unfolded, as I started to catch on more and more of the situation I was in. Because at first I was just surrounded by 20 guys and they didn't have any weapons. And so I didn't really catch what was going on at that time. But as things unfolded, I could see that, oh, no, this is serious. And so I also started to look at our story, It's just unusual. Like, monks that they know of don't do this. Right. And so there's these monks saying that they're just doing, but no one does that. So and I didn't have any identification, and I could see from their side, the whole point I'm trying to make here at this point is, like, I could see it from their conditions why they were actually, I felt kind of bad for them, that I had put him in a bad position because of their relationship in Myanmar with other groups like the military, for example, that they need to protect themselves, and spies is something that can happen. So here I am. I'm putting me in a bind because it's kind of cruel to be a Buddhist monk spy, because you're really putting people in tension with themselves. So I realized the reason I felt kind of bad for him is, like, I put him in this bind, because here we are in front of them dressed as monks, and we were monks, but, like, what do they do? If they make a mistake here, it's a problem. Like, if we're spies and they don't kill us or take care of us somehow, that's a danger to them. And if they get it wrong and we are monks and they kill us, I mean, that's horrible karma. I mean, it's horrible karma anyways, but they hold real monks in reverence, so they were hesitating. but it really put him in I had this compassion for them at the time, like what, and I felt like, wow, I really made a blunder, I this isn't the way to go about it, So I learned later that the best way to introduce yourself. I mean, you kind of never know, and I walked into other areas that we didn't know, like when we were in that other area with the cemetery. They didn't have the same conditions. They weren't in the same relationships with the government, for example, and so they weren't as threatened, or they didn't have as much to lose by an intruder that may be there to mean them harm. They didn't have that kind of paranoia is a little too judgmental of a word, but that concern and skepticism that keeps them safe. That other group didn't need that, so they come check us out. The story seemed reasonable. It did help that there were some people that knew us, so that was kind of extra information that kind of supported our story. So yeah. Just remembering how it felt to sit. The interesting thing about my response, I said it's a nice reflection about how good the practice is going. And this was really a moment of facing death, and one of the signs of that was that the mind started to, and this is usually taken for granted, that we're always just projecting into the future, even if it's just a minute or an hour, or there's just a few thoughts that just kind of come through our thought stream about like what I might have for dinner or what I'm going to do next. And it just became vividly clear that there wasn't going to be a next. I mean, there's going to be a next moment, but like there's not going. It was early evening. There's not going to be it was highly probable that we were going to die, and there wasn't going to be a later evening. Just that thought alone was just such stark contrast to how that mind flow usually goes. I didn't really realize how much the mind interjects little bits of future and kind of takes that for granted to keep this kind of storyline going. Like it was just so clear that this story was going to end, that time in a way was going to stop. But I didn't. So I mean, it's interesting now in the coronavirus, it's sickness and death might be on people's minds more than it normally is. And I think as uncomfortable as that is, it is for a Buddhist, it is also a nice time to reflect. And at that time I got to face death and then see how the mind responds to it. And I was actually okay with it. I was a little sad that my family wouldn't know what happened. I had a trip scheduled home within like a week or two. And I was just going to disappear in the mountains. And I don't even, I mean, I'm sure they were going to dispose of my body in such a way that it wouldn't be easy to find. And so how long would it take for the news to get out that I was even out there wandering? I mean, and let alone never came back. So it would take a while. So yeah, the future for other people was, something I thought about. My family wasn't going to know the story, and that could cause them some distress. But for me, my life actually ending, as stark as that as clear as that probability was, I was okay with that. Like, okay, it doesn't. I'm okay with that. But I could see what I wasn't okay with is the pain I was going to have to go through to get to death, because you look at these guys with these big, heavy bamboo bats, and that's those things kind of caving my skull, and is not necessarily going to be a very pleasant feeling. And will I be able to be equanimous with that sudden contrast in feeling normal to all of a sudden feeling intense pain as I'm being stabbed and beaten to death, because that's like, they weren't going to just shoot me in the head and be done with it. Actually, the feeling I got, I never got this verified, but every able-bodied man in the village was there, and everyone had a weapon. And I was thinking about why, what's that? And because just to be clear, there were no women there were no boys there, and there were no old men there. They were all the men of the village, and actually 2 villages. So I didn't tell this story, but after we left that valley where we encountered that first group of tribe they were still beating the drum sometimes and sending smoke signals. And we were walking towards another village, and that village all came out, of their houses to see us when we entered their village. And we were actually trying to make it to this monastery. We had heard that there's this 90-year-old, pretty well-renowned, not famous, but in that area he was highly revered, this old monk, this abbot, and we were trying to make it to his monastery. And they just gave us a bunch of reasons not to go. And it was very clear that whether those reasons were true or not, that we were not going to be allowed to pass. This is where the feeling started to shift a little bit. So we turned around. And at that time we had about 15 or 20 of, we had I didn't realize at the time, but all of those men from the village followed us. And so we were walking, and we wanted to try to make it back to this monastery where we had some interaction. We didn't sleep there, but we were friendly with the abbot there, and he knew us. So we were just going to go. It was getting dark, so we just thought we'd change plans and go back. And they were following us. And then at a certain point along the way, when we came to that stream again, the men we had encountered before, plus a few more, were there too. So now we had the able-bodied men of two villages there, and I could see along the way that every once in a while one of them would kind of duck off into the bushes and cut off a branch and start whittling it into what I saw later was like a sharp object, like it's something you could stab someone with. And the way it unfolded was slowly. I didn't pick up on. I think my companion picked up on it much earlier than I did. With the smoke signals and the drums, and I just didn't make the connections, until but slowly it was dawning on me that these guys, there's something wrong here. And then so when we stopped and we were met by that other group, that's where we stopped, and it was just as it was getting dark, and I could see everyone had a weapon. I'm like, okay, this is it, this is what we're here, and the whole situation started to dawn on me. And so but like I said, a great time to reflect on the mind. And my companion and I were reflecting later that had we not, he has an incredible mind, so even the pain part that I was talking about before wasn't a concern to him. He was okay with all of it. And he was cool throughout the whole thing, speaking in Burmese to the one young man that spoke Burmese and translating for everyone. And he had some strategy and stuff, but he was relaxed enough to joke around's not quite the right demeanor he had, but he could be light with people and laugh at times, and he was just very light with them and very relaxed. And there was a point actually when I was standing outside the group, so he was surrounded by about maybe 30 people, and he was just sitting down cross-legged, and I was away from him, standing outside, and I was surrounded by about 10 people. And I didn't tell this part of the story, but one of my flip-flops was broken, so I was actually walking barefoot on one foot and only had one flip-flop on. So even if I was dumb enough to run, I wouldn't have been able to get very far. And these guys were in excellent shape anyways and knew the place way better. I mean, I wouldn't have had a chance anyways. And on top of that, I was only wearing one flip-flop, so I didn't stand a chance. It would have been dumb, though. It was clear to me enough that if we did something like run, we would be dead. That would be... It's like... They're thinking about whether to kill us or not. Are these guys really monks or are they spies? And they had already leaned on, to come to that point where we're surrounded by 40 guys and each of them actually has a weapon. And sometimes they're being quite aggressive towards us. The guy with the gun would get right in our face, or not in our face, but he'd look straight at us and show us the gun, just to see how we would react. Mm-hmm. It was very clear to me that they were leaning towards us being spies. I think their hunch was that we were spies, and I think they were there ready to kill us. That was the feeling. They had just enough doubt, though. But what I'm trying to say is, in a group of 40 guys, imagine how they must have felt. They all knew what they needed to do, but that doesn't mean it would be easy. You know, I was going to make this point earlier. I had a feeling that everyone needs to participate in a tribal kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So shooting me wouldn't be enough. I think I had this feeling, and I never got this verified, but everyone would need to have a hand in it as a tribe. So it's 100% a collective decision. It's kind of like your vote. Your participation was your agreement to take this
right.
action as a tribe, and no one could later then say like, hey, I think that was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I can't, like I said, I can't verify, but that's the vibe I had, you know? And so this was going to be like not just one person shooting me, but it's going to be like 40 people, like just beating the crap out of my body until I'm dead. Or stabbing, beating, you know, I'd be lucky to get a blow that would make me pass out at least, you know, until I was dead. But yeah, the mind of my friend, he was very calm. So anyways, I was back to the part of the story. I was outside of the circle, and I realized like, wow, my friend, I mean, I want to talk about him a little bit in a minute, but my friend is really central in this. And really, I'm the one that's central to the reason that he's here. And I'd like to explain that later. But there was a moment when standing outside, I wasn't there because I was afraid, but I realized that I really should be in the center with him, and I wasn't. So I was not quite clear why I was over there. But I actually made this conscious choice to like accept the likely consequences of this evening, and accept it in such a way that you know, I'm with him at the very least. I'm with him in the center of everything. So I went and sat down next to him, cross-legged. So there's these two monks sitting cross-legged, and our demeanor. I was actually, even though I was afraid of a painful dying, I was just wondering how my last mind moments would be in this life. You know, because there's an understanding in Buddhism that some people have, at least, that your last mind moment decides the first mind moment of your next life. And so if it's a strong reaction and aversion to pain, that might not be a great next mind to start with. So yeah. I wasn't quite confident in that particular scenario that my mind would still be good. And so, yeah, I keep missing this point. I was getting near to it. In this group, in the feeling that they have, and this anxiety they might be having that they're going to have to make a decision and actually kill someone, all it takes in a group that size is it to start. You know, one trigger. So out of 40, it only takes one person to initiate beating or stabbing or attacking, would be a better word. Once that starts amongst 40 people that are that anxious and kind of know what they're there to do, I don't think there's any turning back from that. It just triggers the crowd and then it's over. So at any given time throughout this whole process, which is probably like a half an hour of talking to these guys, at any minute, any moment, if we had triggered even one of them, we would have been done. So that's back to the running. Running would have been such an event. You know, they would have been sure that we're guilty and we're running, you know, to get away because we know we're wrong or we're caught. That would just show, that would be the type of thing that would show them that they had, in fact, caught two spies. They would have no problem getting rid of us. But our demeanor, like I said, was not like that. And so his demeanor of being light with them and even laughing at times with them, you know, and continuing to talk to them very calmly. And basically, it served us really well that we were calm because we were acting like monks might act in this case. They asked us to open up our bowls, which is how we were carrying a lot of our things inside the bowl. It's just another tip I learned when at different stages of learning how to be a forest monk, how to do this. So, but we did this very calmly. You know, we weren't like anxious and panicked and trying to please or talk them out of things. We just we actually took cloths out and put them down in a very mindful way, and then just didn't just dump the bowl and say, there, look, you know, in kind of anxious way to prove ourselves. We just kind of slowly and in a very neat way unpacked our bowls in front of them so they could, and I just put everything on display on this cloth so they could see everything.
Right.
And so it wasn't just that they could see that we didn't have any spy equipment. I guess James Bond would have stuff that looked like monk stuff, but we actually would be spy equipment. But I think they could see that we just had what you would expect someone walking around to have. You know, flashlight. I had a flashlight or torch, and there's just this kind of basic stuff you need, like soap and toothpaste and a toothbrush and a razor to shave, and just the normal stuff that the monks are allowed. But the confidence didn't just come from seeing what we had. I think that played, but also our demeanor. And we realized the next day that had we reacted any differently, we would have been dead. And we could both kind of imagine, we talked about this, we could imagine being with certain people that would have panicked in that moment of facing death. And if either one of us had done that, we would have been dead. And we were both sure of that. And so our practice saved us. But it's interesting, like, because one thing I reflect upon is, like, I have old issues in me that I hate being misunderstood. And here's this case where I'm about to die being misunderstood. But that didn't bother me. It didn't bother me. And I was asking myself why. And there's a different condition. It was that it unfolded slowly and gave me enough time to understand their conditions. Helped me. If it had surprised me, I know I'd still have the capacity to react to being misunderstood. And if that had happened, it could have been a totally different outcome. So partly is I do have some development in myself that helped me be comfortable with death. I think that's true anyways. But as far as being misunderstood, it was really just that it unfolded slowly, and I was kind of thinking about, had some space to think about things from their side, and that helped. So it's not like in every single condition I would have felt compassion for them. But and so I think that's interesting. You know, I'm not trying to say that my mind is totally free from that particular condition. And it's just amazing to me, even as I'm telling this story now, just how the Buddha emphasizes causes and conditions. There's no things that are here. Everything that's here is because of the causes and conditions. And it just the story, that's one of the reasons I like to tell this story, is just how prevalent that is, because it's not about, oh, I almost died and I have this kind of terrific, horrific story to tell. It's or almost horrific. It didn't. Obviously, I'm here talking about it. It didn't end in death. But really, the demeanor of my companion. You know, the way I met him is so fascinating. He lives just a 2-hour walk behind my little monastery. But it's over a ridge, and it's out of the valley I'm in. You know, so it's not just in another side valley, another part of my valley. It's actually in a whole other valley. And I just had never, I don't know why, but I had just never wandered over that way. And so the first time I went wandering on this longer trip, you know, I'd taken shorter excursions before. You know, I had my handmade robes, and I had my roll on my back. I kind of made up my own style because Burmese don't have one, and I wanted to modify what I learned in Thailand to kind of suit what I had in Myanmar. And so I set off with a walking stick and my flip-flops and just what I had on my back, you know, to go on this journey. But not long into I actually stayed in a cave that night. But the next day I had made it over the ridge. The cave was actually up on the ridge, a beautiful spot, very quiet. No water, though, so I had to go to the monastery that was not too far away in the village for alms round, of course, and for water. But the next day I crossed the ridge, and the first thing I saw was this stunning, tall, sharp, like, you know, pointy, just picturesque peak. Like, wow, that's a beautiful mountain. And then, you know, I had no aim as far as location. So I could, anytime I came to a junction, I could just feel into it, or for whatever condition arose at that time, decide which way to go. But seeing that mountain was a condition. And so I say, hey, I'm just going to go towards that mountain. So I walk that way, and there's a beautiful village at the foot of the mountain. You know, there's different types of banyan trees, but Myanmar has these banyan trees that have super thick trunks, and they spread out. The tree spreads out incredibly wide, and the shape of it is more wide than tall. And some of the branches, the trunk actually isn't very tall. It goes up just a little bit, this kind of stubby trunk, and then the branches that come off of that are often thicker than trees, normal trees. I mean, it's huge, massive, and it's like, and these branches that are so thick, they spread out so far. It's like they got to be heavy. It's like the wood has to be, the tree has to be incredibly strong. That's what it actually looks like, a giant, stocky, but beautiful. They're just beautiful trees, and they just have this. But I always wonder how those trees, those particular branches, don't break. They got to be so heavy. They could go out for like 100 feet in each direction, or yeah, maybe something like that, 60, 80, 100 feet. Like, and they could be a meter thick themselves, you know, at the base of the branch, you know, and yeah. Anyway, so right when you come to the town, there's one of these giant trees, and so I just had this really, things were just unfolding kind of nicely, you know, and but it was getting kind of late, and I asked the locals if there's any caves nearby, and there was actually one at the base of this mountain. Turned out it was pretty crappy as far as caves go, you know. No water source, it was really close to the road, and kind of dusty, and it was more like an alcove. It wasn't an actual cave, it was an alcove. But, you know, that's fine. It'll do for a night. And it was surprising, the villagers were quite friendly. They were quite inviting, you know. They were very welcoming. And they kind of knew monks' rules to some degree. I could see that they had some good influence. And so some villagers even came to the alcove and brought me water, which they knew I needed. And they brought me sweets, which, I mean, I think the sweets had milk in them, so that's against Vinaya. But candy in general, like sugar, isn't. So they actually were thinking they were abiding by my rules by offering me these candies, you know, that's something I can actually snack, I could have in the afternoon. So it was very beautiful and generous gift, you know, to walk a little ways out of the village and bring that to me. So I went on alms round the next day in that village, and there were people kind of showing me a route I could go on there, you know, so I had a kid kind of pointing here and there. But some of the villagers that had come the day before with the water and the sweets, actually, they told me that there was actually monks. I mean, it was a really steep mountain, so I didn't even know if there was a way up. But not only was there a way up, there was actually a monastery up there, and there were these two monks actually teaching vipassana up there. They could see clearly that not only was a forest monk, they could see I was sitting cross-legged, I was meditating, and so they told me that there's these two monks teaching vipassana up on the mountain. It's like, wow, what good fortune, you know, when you kind of step out into your hero's journey, so to speak. And I stepped out on this wandering to kind of encounter things that, I mean, who knows, maybe it would be, sometimes things sound good and they're not necessary, but at least at the moment, this sounded great. Like, wow, what a great fit, you know, so.
Right.
And the next morning, sure enough, when I got a different look at this steep mountain, I could see that there were actually a temple on the top. You know, not a monastery, but there was like a Buddha statue and a shrine. You know, and you know, a little pagoda. You know, you could see it from all around. And sure enough, of course, there's a path going up there. So. So after alms round, after I ate, I packed up my stuff and rolled it all up and put it on my back, and I just set off to meet these guys. So these two monks that were actually turned out to be Pa Auk monks, and they would teach. Who were they teaching? You know, they were actually, there's a whole set of nuns up there, some really young girls all the way up to some older ones. So the youngest ones weren't learning meditation, and some of the oldest ones were taking care of the young ones. But the rest of them were actually, that's all they were doing, is listening to discourses and meditating and under these two monks' instruction. Actually, one of them was more responsible for discourses, and the other one was more responsible for teaching, guiding meditation. But pretty phenomenal. I mean, for lots of reasons. So the setup, the place they would all meet for teaching was on a saddle. And on the saddle from one side, it just goes up a gentle slope to a kind of a hill. And that's the side the nuns all stayed on. They didn't stay anywhere near each other when they slept. So they stayed on one side, and you go up the saddle, it goes up very steeply up to the top of the peak. And it's up that way that the monks had a couple huts, including an extra one for me. So they were very welcoming. But of course checking me out at first to see what kind of monk I was, and they could see very, and we could talk a bit. I spoke just enough Burmese. I was very interested in their vipassana, so that they were doing that, and they could see I had background and knowledge and information in meditation, and they learned. Later we were talking about scripture and practice and everything. So that I had some pariyati and patipati. So basically they were very welcoming to me, and they told me later that they're not welcoming to everyone because they just want. They want people that are serious about being monks, both pariyati and patipati. So I made the cut. So I stayed with them. I was only going to stay with them. I decided to stay a couple days. I went on alms round with them and just kind of, it was part of my journey. There's no hurry. I wanted to kind of learn about how they're living, what they were doing. I mean, it's a whole story unto itself, and it was nice to have some serious companions nearby, I mean, so I kind of told them where I lived and how close it actually was. And so here I am actually staying on this beautiful mountain that I saw a couple days ago, talking to, and have new companions that are good monks. And doing an enormous thing. So what I said is interesting in and of itself, the fact that they're teaching nuns. It's not everywhere in Myanmar that nuns get that kind of attention. I mean, oftentimes the ones you see in pink are actually, they serve the monastery, often in very physical ways, like cooking and cleaning.
Right.
So that's more often the case, that people focus. I mean, it does happen in Myanmar, what I'm talking about, like in Pa Auk, for example, and other places. But those are more few and far between. But here's a place where they're actually focusing on teaching nuns. And I just thought that was a really beautiful gesture. And another thing, I think this is unique. I mean, you wouldn't know it at first, but according to the Burmese council, the 8 and 10-precept nuns that are there are not allowed to go on alms round daily. I think they're limited to once a week. But up on that mountain, with the support, there wasn't any water on that mountain unless it rained. They had ways of collecting rainwater. But the locals are actually so supportive of these people, the monks and the nuns being there and what they were doing, that they carry water up every day for drinking and cooking.
Right.
And it's steep. I mean, going back to the shape of this mountain, it looks like it's really steep and sharp, like fang-like, but in a beautiful kind of way. So when I talk about hauling water up there, water is heavy, and it's steep. These guys, the village actually works quite hard to support their monastics, and there's no other way to do it. The point I'm trying to make here is there's no other way to do it than for the nuns to go. They go on daily alms rounds, and so that's so if you don't know the context, that's so what, that's what monastics should be doing. But no, it's a rarity that they actually go every day into the village just like monks. And I have my own feelings about that. My own personal feelings is I wish there was an order of nuns still, and I think there can be. I'm not of the camp that thinks that it can no longer be established. And there's a bunch of reasons for that I won't go into here, and that's a whole nother topic. But it just did make me very happy that these nuns were actually getting to live much more like full nuns than is otherwise possible. And again, it's back to conditions, right? It's like there would be no other way to function for them. They couldn't pull this off easily any other way. And so everyone just accepted that this is what we're going to do here. It was happening, so it's great. Okay, here's the surprising part, though. So, I'm ready to go the next day. And to my surprise, the Sayadaw, he had about, I think, 10 or 11 Vasa is how you count the number of years. Vasa is the rains retreat, so you count in number of rains retreats.
Right.
So if you become a monk actually right before rains retreat, and after 3 months, you already have one Vasa, even though you haven't been a monk for a year. But that's how they count. He had about 11. But numbers don't mean everything. What's impressive about this gentleman, this monastic Bhante, was you never know what you're going to find when you set out on these journeys, but here's a monk that actually, just like the Wat Pah Nanachat monks, has the knowledge of how to live like the type of monk he established all the stuff on the mountain. And he was actually a Dhutaṅga monk. These 13 aesthetic practices, he's done them all, including like the rags robe. Like his outer robe was actually a rag robe. So that's one of the Dhutaṅga practices, is you wear only robes made from rags, discarded cloth that you found. And so, I mean, I was surprised, and he didn't boast about it. He didn't tell me all this. I just kind of saw as time went on that he was following. All 3 of the monks there were following the 1 meal a day practice, but he was following like many of them, including, I think, the most difficult one. Some of them aren't available. Like I said, the cemetery one, if there's no cemetery on, you can't always follow all 13, and you don't need to. It's like the way you work with that's a whole nother story, but the way you work with Dhutaṅga is just to help you somehow. So there's a reason and a purpose and a benefit to each one of them. But he was actually following what I think is, for me, the most difficult one, is the sitters practice, which means they never lie down. And so our entire time walking around together, when we picked a spot in the forest, he would just spread out his sitting cloth. He had a different eye for things. So he would look for like a rock that had an incline to it, or a tree that had a nice incline, the type of place you'd like to sit down but lean back against in a way that would be comfortable for your back. And interestingly, in the Buddha's time, the Buddha did allow for a backboard. That is one of the allowable items the monks can have. Not that I don't think a forest monk would carry that around with him, but in a monastery, you were allowed to have, sitting all the time. You could lean against something. And I had a new appreciation for the sitters practice, because one of the benefits I never saw before until I saw it, not just from a monk, because you could do that in a monastery, but living in the forest. It's like you don't have to carry. I mean, I carried a mat, and so I could sleep on the ground without getting dirty. And my mat has to be much bigger than his sitting cloth. And I carried a rain tarp that's big enough to cover me when I'm sleeping, which is, again, much bigger than it would need to just have a poncho or something, or an umbrella, if you were just sitting all the time. When I was a backpacker and a mountaineer, when I was a layperson, I was really into like packing small and light, and so the same ideas carry over to forest monk. It's ideal if you're not having to lug all this stuff around with you. And as someone doing the sitters practice actually doesn't have to carry extra stuff for sleeping, because they just sit back and go to sleep sitting down. So I was like, wow, that's great. So I had this kind of new, I never did try it, but I had this at least new inspiration and appreciation of it. But more than anything, so here's this monk that was very familiar with living in the forest, had lots of tips. Again, they just kind of unfold, like kind of in the Thai way, he didn't like sit down and teach me all these things. He just watch and learn. And Dhutaṅga practices, he knew how to do them all, and had done them. So it's not like he just was knowledgeable of it. It was in him. So it was just so surprising that he just basically, he's a Sayadaw. He was only responsible for teaching the discourses in the Dhamma, but he basically just left the monastery to the other guy and just went with me. Which was a phenomenal decision in and of itself, but he was also just such a great companion in so many ways of me apprenticing the forest monk life, which again is in Thailand is a lot easier to access because they have a very well-known and very identified, defined forest tradition. There are forest monks in Myanmar, but you kind of stumble across them, or like I was doing here. This is kind of how you, other than, like there is Mahabodhi Myang Sayadaw, which is a famous forest monk here in Myanmar, but he's hard to encounter anyways. But yeah, so it's hard to get you can't just go somewhere and find formal training in forest monks. So I had this great, I was apprentice and I had someone to show me. But he had a great mind too. So you could see that his practice was quite well developed and exemplified by, like both of us, not panicking when we were encountering impending death. No other way to put it. But like I said, he even wasn't afraid of the dying part, the pain, and he felt quite relaxed that his mind could handle the beating on the way to death as well. And so that was very impressive. One thing, I've kind of talked about this already, but one thing that's really clear to me is, again, just how some of the Vinaya that a monk studies don't always make sense. And I realize it's because a lot of it makes a lot of sense, but some of it is out of context. And when you start living the forest monk life, you don't have to practice the Dhutaṅga. One of them would be Dhutaṅga because you're actually sleeping in the forest without a monastery. So you're sleeping away from the village. So that is one of the Dhutaṅgas. But what I realized is a lot of the stuff that monks were required to do makes a lot more sense when you're actually living that way. And until you live that way, you don't necessarily see it. And so, and one of the things specifically is like, why did the Buddha recommend that monks go out? Now, if you read the suttas, the stories are full of examples of encounters with danger. Dacoits, they call them in India, which are like robbers and thieves and marauders and murderers. And there's also the wild animals and the snakes and tigers. And, it was perhaps even more so at the time. There were definitely areas that were known to be dangerous from robbers and thieves and killers. And so they're stealing and murdering and all kinds of stuff. And the wild animals were at least as much present then because, humans hadn't, population growth hadn't encroached so much into wild spaces. So why did the Buddha recommend that they go out? They could stay safe in monasteries and just meditate. Why wasn't that the recommendation? When I faced this situation, and actually in more minor ways, other situations that I encountered as a forest monk, the practice comes more alive in a way that it doesn't otherwise. At the point of like being that close to triggering people, like assaulting us and killing us, your practice is literally do or die. And if you really can, and I think it's probably dangerous to do this before you've established at least some basic level of stability in the Dhamma as a practice. Like the mind has a place to go where it can become calm or stay there and steady and kind of stepped back from, not getting caught up in the narrative or whatever it might be or whatever our practice is, that is stabilized. And this is another reason why, monks are required, they're supposed to be required to stay with a teacher under a teaching for 5 years. It's called dependency until they become independent. But what it does, like, no matter the situation where, and I can only imagine this with wild animals because I haven't encountered that in the forest yet, other than like giant centipedes, your practice is paramount. And if you really are established in the practice, it really strengthens your faith, your saddha in Dhamma itself.
Mm-hmm.
How to explain it? It all of these situations, it's like, I just wonder how many times you could actually go through a near-death experience, and the mind would start to, because it experienced it so many times, and in those moments moves towards the Dhamma automatically. And it's clear that the Dhamma is actually what's getting you out of this. This confidence that, like, if you stick with the Dhamma, it doesn't really matter what happens, even if you did die. So it's not about like, I as an ego got out of being killed. It's like, it doesn't matter. It just becomes clearer and clearer, even from one strong episode like this, and then a bunch of smaller ones. I could imagine having a life of occasionally encountering such danger and difficulty that using the Dhamma, applied Dhamma in those particular moments, what it does to my faith in the Dhamma, we didn't really need to get involved in the narrative of these people. And we didn't need to fight against it or try to be clever in any ways. The space that we had in our minds, because we were relaxed and practicing in the moment, allowed us to see their story and have compassion, for one. But just to see that, like, really you don't need the narrative so much. You just need to stick with the Dhamma. And the Dhamma, like, no matter what, is like what it's the strength of everything. So really, I could just see how these encounters themselves played such a role in strengthening. Not only do you rely on Dhamma at those times, that event itself really gives a boost to Dhamma. Almost like if you're playing a video game and you hit a booster, all of a sudden so all of a sudden your Dhamma boosts up. So it just, in hindsight or in retrospect, it becomes very clear why the Buddha would have really inclined people to suggest that people, the monks and nuns, well, nuns it's a little different companionship wise, but to go out knowing that there's these dangers. It's not that you go looking for danger. And he wasn't trying to put monks in danger's way. I mean, that becomes clear too. So it's not that extreme. It's a middle path. But the other extreme is to kind of hunker down in a monastery for the rest of your life in order to avoid those dangers. I mean, there might be other reasons for hunkering down in a monastery, but that middle line, like, yeah, there's these monasteries, and yeah, there's this incredible opportunity when you just kind of put yourself out there. So I talked about this major event of being threatened with violent death at the hands of 40 people, and a minor one. I mentioned these minor ones as well. And a minor one is when you stay in a monastery for a long time. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, but I think you'll see the advantage of leaving. When you stay a long time in a monastery, for example, when you go on alms rounds, whether you notice it or not, the mind can relax because the mind knows it's going to give food every day. There's this real primal thing of, am I going to survive? That's part of the Dhamma makeup of who we are and how we are as human beings. And there's this assuredness of food, basically. There's exceptions in the Buddhist time of famines and stuff, but by and large, most years and most days, you go out, you'll get plenty of food. I mean, if you got plenty of food yesterday, there's every reason the mind can relax and think that today is going to be fine. When you step away from what you know and go to unfamiliar places, and places perhaps where their monks aren't necessarily going around and establishing any precedent for you, you're walking into an unknown at a real primal and basic level. Will I get enough food? Or will I get any food? And it so happened in one of the villages, they weren't used to alms rounds. They had a system where every day the monks would come to the monastery. I'm sorry, the villagers would come to the monastery with food and feed the monks right there. There were no alms rounds. So that village didn't really understand alms rounds. And we did play this card right. We did go to the abbot of that monastery to let him know we had slept in the forest, which he thought was kind of very odd. Because he would have given us a room to stay in his monastery without question. And then the next night, we also went to sleep in the forest, which he thought was odd. He had offered us a room, but we told him we were there. We asked him, I think we actually got a tip from someone that's what we should do. But we went to the abbot and asked him for permission to go on alms round in his village, essentially. And that was the right way to go. So even if the villagers didn't understand what we were doing, which they didn't, which I'll tell in a minute, at least the abbot was behind, he had given us the nod, so that was all going to be okay. But when we actually went around on alms round, people didn't know what we wanted. And we weren't getting any alms, any food at all for quite a while. And then one family saw us and they went in and they gave us a little bit of chat. They actually gave us money. And, neither one of us accepts money. So we politely declined the money they gave us, or trying to give us. And they said, well, what is it you want? And we said, we do this every morning to gather food. And it just hadn't occurred to them or anyone else. It was only when other people kind of saw that we were accepting food that some other houses gave us food. But really, that would have been a hard village to go on alms round every day, because we weren't hardly getting any alms. We were getting enough rice, but it would have been hard to sustain life for a long, long time in that village if that continued. Like, I think one day there was mostly it was plain rice, and I think we got a couple bags of potato chips, or potato crisps, as some people call them, and maybe one curry, and that's it. Like for other than rice, we were crunching up potato chips to put in, to mix into the rice, and that was our meal for that day. That's a nice Dhamma experience. How is the mind responding to this? Is it starting to worry about sustenance? Is it at peace or not? Is it accepting the reality? So it's really interesting to see the mind. And again, it connects me directly to the Buddhist teachings. Like, it's not that things are outdated in history. Like, everything that I'm talking about can still be done in the modern times. It's just not being done. I'm talking about like going out away from your monastery and going around to either other monasteries or into the forest. I start to connect with the stories that are in the suttas because they still happen. Like, for example, there's a sutta that gives different environments, whether you're in the forest with a particular teacher or in a monastery or this or this or this. And it's like, is the practice going well? And are you getting enough food on your alms round? What the sutta boils down to is, if the practice is going well, don't leave. So normally he says don't stay anywhere too long, but this is like the exception. If your practice is going well, stay. And stay no matter whether the food seems like it's enough or not. Like, don't interrupt good practice for anything. And on the other hand, whether the food is good or not, if the food is great, so it means like you're actually getting well taken care of, but the practice isn't really going anywhere, leave at once. So that part about being somewhere, and I wasn't so much focused on my practice, but there are these events where monks, the alms are not necessarily going very well. And so I actually have an actual experience that ties me into that story. So it becomes more alive again. And that happens that's just one example. There's lots of, I won't give more, but when you actually start living the life that is suggested and recommended by the Buddha, it directly connected me to the stories being told. It boosted faith, it strengthened the Dhamma, and it brought the teachings more into the present day. And so there's just, I mean, how many benefits came from this one event? I just stepped out once, and that's why I could tell this story as if it's this horrific, terrifying story. And like, wow, I'm not gonna do that again. I'm never gonna leave my monastery. Certain minds could conclude that way, but where my mind concluded is just the opposite. It's like, wow, this was really valuable, even though it nearly cost me my life. Eventually, I think one could get so skilled with that movement, and I think again, changing environments really keeps it alive, and kind of shakes the mind up in good ways, so it doesn't become complacent. This skill of being able to just stay in the heart of Dhamma all the time and let the stories just kind of unfold around you. It doesn't really matter what they are. You just kind of stay with the Dhamma and let everything else take its course. I saw that I developed that just a little bit, and that the opportunity, if I had continued, would only unfold more of that. So that's why I like to tell the story and have a bit of time, because there was just so many benefits to it. There's so much beauty to the story, and just being able to see the mind and develop in the Dhamma and relate to the Buddha. Like I said, it's just the experience was just it's a top experience. Like I said in the beginning, this is the story to tell.
Yeah, right. It's great to have the time to be able to flesh these stories out, and thanks for doing it this time.
Yeah, welcome. I like the way in some of the podcasts we've done before that, Alan and others have brought up, and we've brought up in the dialogue that we have after, how much causes and conditions are at play, and we can see them. And it's nice that several practitioners highlight that, such an important piece to see, and so this story is kind of my contribution to feel how important conditions are. So actually, anytime I hear on an interview that people start referencing conditionality, like, it connects me to what they're saying too, because of these types of experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And in some of those other podcasts we do, we're not able to have the time to be able to respond with, even when there are similar stories such as this, to be able to flesh them out in the limited time that we have. So it's great to take the time here, and then later on in podcasts we'll be able to refer to points of this, assuming listeners are able to check in at the different episodes.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was interesting reliving the story in real time again. So yeah, that's my story. I'm having one last thought regarding all this that that arose while you were speaking. Is like, if this is something the Buddha recommended, how could we, and I'll leave it more as a question, what am I doing that's making the mind complacent, and how might shaking things up, going out of my comfort zone, or just trying new things, or how could that be kind of a parallel to that suggestion of the Buddha, that actually in the spirit of it is actually following the Buddha's recommendation to kind of get out there. So yeah, that's my final thought.
This podcast is made by Dhamma practitioners for Dhamma practitioners. Let me take a moment to tell you about our team, who all bring technical skills along with their dedication to the Dhamma to this work. One sound engineer, Martin Combs, is a composer and producer living in the Netherlands. The other, Thar-Ngay, is a local Burmese sound engineer who also helped us set up our recording studio. Zach Hessler is a former forest monk who lived in Myanmar that helps with content, and Ken Pransky uses his considerable skills in editing to help with our scripted content. As for me, I've been exploring how the Buddha's teachings are carried out in Myanmar for the last decade. We are very fortunate as well, because to cut our costs as low as possible to allow us to produce as many episodes as we can at this quality level, some members of our team are willing to work on this project as volunteers, and others take only a very small fraction of their usual salary. However, even so, alas, these episodes cannot be produced for free. Given the extensive work that's involved in even one 90-minute interview, there is a minimum fixed cost. And to cover those costs, we rely on listeners like you that benefit from this content. If you find the Dhamma interviews we are sharing of value and would like to support our mission, we welcome your contribution. You may give via Patreon at www.patreon.com/insightmyanmar, as well as via PayPal at www.paypal.me/insightmyanmar. In both cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you are in Myanmar and would like to give a cash donation, please feel free to get in touch with us. You have been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We would appreciate it very much if you would be willing to rate, review, and/or share this podcast. Every little bit of feedback helps. If you are interested, you can subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please check out our website for a list of our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information available at www.insightmyanmar.org. If you cannot find our feed on your podcast player, please let us know and we will ensure it can be offered there. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, and we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. You can make a post, suggest a guest, request specific questions, and join in on discussions on our Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. You are also most welcome to follow our Facebook and Instagram accounts by the same name. If you're not on Facebook, you can also message us directly at burmadhamma@gmail.com. That's one word, burmadhamma@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know and we can share that forum here. We would also like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, especially our two sound engineers, Martin Combs and Tharng A. There's, of course, Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing. Dragos Bandita and Andre Francois make our sketches. GPU does our Burmese translation. Herman Perez, Santiago Hedar, and Marisol do our Spanish translations. And a special Mongolian volunteer who has asked to remain anonymous does our social media templates. We'd also like to thank everyone who assisted us in arranging for the guests we have interviewed so far. And of course, we send a big thank you to the guests themselves for agreeing to come and share such powerful personal stories. Finally, we're immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible in the first place. We also remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and not necessarily reflective of the host or other podcast contributors. Also, this recording is the exclusive right of Insight Myanmar podcast. It is meant for personal listening only and cannot be used without the express written permission of the podcast owner. This includes any video, audio, written transcript, or excerpt of any episode. That said, we are open for collaboration, so if you have a particular idea in mind for sharing any of our podcasts or podcast-related information, please feel free to contact us with your proposal. Finally, we welcome your contribution in any amount, denomination, or transfer method. You may give via Patreon at www.patreon.com/insightmyanmar, via PayPal at www.paypal.me/insightmyanmar, or by credit card by going to www.insightmyanmar.org/donation. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you'd like to give especially to support our new run of coronavirus episodes, please go to the GoFundMe site and search for Insight Myanmar to find our campaign there. If you are in Myanmar and would like to give a cash donation, please feel free to get in touch with us. With that, thank you for listening, and we welcome back next show.